Good day, and welcome to this edition of our Solace webinar. Today we have two presenters, Terry Roche, who is part of the Tabb group, and Keith McAuliffe, who works for Solace. Terry is responsible for business development and FinTech thought leadership at the Tabb group, and has also been Chief Operating Officer at New York Stock Exchange Technologies. He's held a number of executive positions at Thomson Reuters, and Reuters. Is quite knowledgeable in this particular case. He's been around quite a while, sort of like me, for this, and has been involved in finance across almost his entire career. Keith is the general manager for financial services here at Solace. He's has global responsibility for Solace's clients in banking, capital markets, and insurance. He's also worked with IBM as a distinguished engineer and as a global client director with several large financial firms. Given both of our speakers today, we have a deep understanding of the financial industry, its trends, as well as a deep understanding of the technology needed to move ahead in the future. So with that, we're going to be learning about how quants are winning the battle for alpha using artificial intelligence and smarter infrastructure. With that, Terry, Keith, welcome to our webinar.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate the warm introduction. And Terry, thank you so much for joining us here for our monthly webinar here that we run at Solace.
It's my pleasure. And yes, I used to just say I was old, but now I say that I'm an industry veteran, so I appreciate the introduction. Thank you.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Excellent. So welcome, everyone. Appreciate everyone taking time out of your day to join us for this hour session. We are hopefully looking forward to a very interactive session towards the end with some questions that will come up. Today's agenda that I'll take us through is introductions, which Dave just completed for us. We'll dive right into a very timely conversation around capital markets and artificial intelligence. When we see artificial intelligence as it's starting to become part of our day-to-day life in our consumer world, capital markets firms are investing very heavily in these technologies for both machine learning and artificial intelligence to differentiate in the marketplace. And that's going to be the bulk of our conversation today. We'll talk also on the smarter infrastructure side. So as companies are starting to embrace these next generation technologies around machine learning, around large ingest of data, around generating insights from these signals, what are the types of infrastructure, both from a hardware and a software, and more importantly nowadays, cloud perspective that capital markets firms and the quants are using to create a differentiated value proposition. We'll then apply this to what you can do in your own firms. As you see, these technologies are coming to market. We're seeing an extreme adoption both of the open source capabilities as well as commercialization of technologies that were once very used only in private circumstances are now being used more in the public domain. And then we'll end at about 45 minutes into the presentation for some questions and answers that Dave will help us moderate. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Terry, who will take us through the current capital markets proposition.
Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon. I think as we're discussing the future of where capital markets is going, it perhaps wouldn't be so bad just to hover for a moment and think about where we've come from. Capital markets industry, I think it'd be fair to say, outside of military, was the leader in the first digital revolution over 20 years ago, when we went from screen-based information delivery for only human consumption to then digitizing data, harnessing it to data feeds for computer and human consumption. That digital revolution happened approximately 25 years ago. And we see a capital markets industry that is faced now through secular technological trends facing significant opportunities and threats, while at the same time, given that the capital markets was the first digital industry, perhaps now has a first mover disadvantage. Its infrastructure was created before there was the internet, before there were PCs, before there were messaging standards, data standards. So much of the industry had been created in each organization within silos, and as mentioned, lacking significantly in standards. And I think that we see other industries able to move forward far more dynamically because they are more recent vintage, using more standardized technological capabilities that have come about in perhaps the last 10 or 15 years and have far more agility because of it. We are, however, seeing that leading firms, and I think we might need to amend this, as many firms, or perhaps moving towards most firms, are starting to at least look, and many are starting to transform their business models through a combination of new technologies, which we'll be talking about. So this is not a single technological trend. These technological drivers that we'll be discussing are, I would suggest you should view as threads in a fabric coming together. And we're certainly not a business as usual. Market structure will be challenged by this transformation. Regulation will be transferred. Human capital, regulation will be challenged. Human capital will be challenged. And it's an interesting and I think some ways bright future, but one that's going to be significantly different.
Great, thank you, Terry. Really appreciate that opening comments and insights. What do you think are going to be the major benefits that capital markets firms are going to achieve when they start looking at these next generation technologies?
Well, I think since we are a money business, people think about what's the positive impacts on cost of operation. So we think about automation capabilities, moving forward to more efficient compute capabilities, either cloud-based or through probably more partnerships with hybrid cloud. I think that there's an undeniable economic windfall that will be coming. That windfall, however, will be somewhat ameliorated through the need to have to transform a lot of non-standardized bits. I think that as we're moving forward to becoming much more of a digital, much more of a cognitive-based industry, that the challenges around data provenance, auditability of information are going to be significantly addressed because the business isn't going to be able to operate without exceptional data management capabilities. This business, while we're going to be talking about technologies, first and foremost, it's a data business. All the technologies we're talking about are how to manage data, how to obtain insight from data, how to serve clients better through data, and I think that's one of the core challenges that we'll see for some in the industry, that the need for transitioning to data science, the different information streams that are coming through, it's all about the data, and that will bring efficiencies and insight.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry. So our next chart takes us through the FinTech. So everyone who's based on either the East Coast or West Coast or any of the major global financial capitals has heard of FinTech. We have organizations that have started garages and they hold meetups. Terry, maybe just spend a minute and give me your perspective of how do you define FinTech?
Well, it's pretty exciting to know that, I've been in an industry called FinTech for 32 years, and it was only pointed out a couple of years ago that it's called FinTech. It's nice having labels on things. I mean, financial technology, runs the whole gamut. I think it's a brilliant marketing term, but it's been with us for a generation in different forms. I think it perhaps has been harnessed somewhat from what had been barbarians at the gates of either Valley or other organizations coming into capital markets, being represented perhaps not by themselves, but perhaps by pundits as changing what capital markets is going to be. And I think those barbarians at the gates are now actually being invited to dinner to help with the transformations. So what we really see happening, and it is already happening, we are seeing workflows automated and value propositions digitized. Understanding the workflow changes that are occurring is at the key of what's happening in capital markets. Economics of service provision is being transformed with cloud offerings. I think that if you look at virtually every service offering, if not every service offering that is starting now, it will have a cloud-based component, typically being cloud-based combining mobile, social, big data analytics, cognitive or machine learning as a service, and microservices or in a cloud-native way. One of the keys that we see towards this growth towards the transition is not just the affordable compute and data storage that one might find in the cloud or through more advanced compute infrastructure, but we're seeing significant alternative data that is growing significantly and doubling now. We're seeing at least every 18 months. We've had market data with us forever that's had a consistent track of growth, but now we're seeing information that's come through satellite imagery, geothermal imagery, through social media data being mined, and with the Internet of Things sensors finding their ways into industrial networks, and there's starting to be a realization that the amount of alternative information that could provide real insight, including communications information through natural language processing to monitor and consume information from e-communications traffic, email, chat, through voice transcripts is growing and growing to be able to provide a significantly enhanced data landscape to manage. With all of that data, obtaining insight and making valuable moves from that information is now only going to be available through cognitive computing or machine learning. Through, and each step of the way, if you just take natural language processing for a moment, to be able to understand not just the lexicon of language, but the slang, the context of all of what's going on. Without machine learning, it's frankly not possible. And with the data is only valuable when it's put into context and correlation with other data. And that's where we're seeing, we believe, significant moves towards machine learning, towards neural nets. The interesting part is neural nets have been with us 15, 20 years. The structure of those neural nets architectures haven't really changed. I think what has changed significantly is the compute capability and the data that's being plugged into it. And last but not least, blockchain, or as capital markets prefers to call it now, digital ledger technology, will provide a trusted data and workflow fabric that will unlock and I believe transform every single economic workflow that there is. And it's going to be adding a heck of a lot more data to this entire fabric, but data that is sure, that is trusted, that shows where a transaction has occurred. So we're seeing all of these drivers. None of them stands alone. Every single one of these drivers is weaved with the others, and we are seeing a next-gen economy transforming every workflow is absolutely happening right now.
That's excellent, Terry. So really, you painted a phenomenal landscape on, what the industry broad scope is facing, how we're globally interconnected as well, as market forces and flash crashes occur in one industry, how does that affect other industries? All these interconnected networks that you mentioned really do have a dramatic effect on the global economy, and really, more importantly, how society tries to plan for 10, 20, 30, 40 years out as well. I mean, access to capital. At the end of the day, capital markets, when we go back to our origins, was about access to capital and building the Industrial Revolution. Where do you see access to capital, looking at AI? Are there new micro-segmentations that people can start to identify and try to help some of the underserved, maybe that have not been able to get capital previously?
Yeah, I think so in some ways. I think it's a workflow aspect. The fun bit about capital markets is probably the most heavily regulated industry that there is, for good reason. Since we're talking about the investment and quite often the retirement funds for such a large percentage of people around the globe, which are ultimately served through it. I think that we're seeing models evolve that we're going to talk about later in the presentation, that through things that used to be called robo-advisors, but again, through a changing automated workflow that's driven by data, is able to serve parts of the marketplace that in the past may have been underserved. Sort of the high compensated, not yet wealthy, were never served by the wealth management industry, but through robo-advisors, they're starting to get services. Through Facebook, you can go ahead and do your typical social things, or get a mortgage, or buy or sell a security, or do whatever you like on there. That the view of these application segregated workflows is collapsing into a world where it's all abstracted from the end user view on more of the retail side. We're certainly seeing far more investment coming into the industry with numerous applications that are driven by RoboVisor algos that are informed by alternative data and machine learning. So the scalability through machines and data is so much more vast to serve the investment community than it had been from humans. If you take only that point alone, then there's significant increase in service in the industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry, for that. So as we focus now really onto AI and what capital markets has been doing over the last few years, there's always been new technology teams inside of capital markets focusing on next generation networking technology, the emergence of microwave transmission or ultra high frequency, low latency networks. We have domain specific languages that have been created in financial services. We have the adoption of open source technologies. We have time series databases. These are all new technologies that have really found their grassroots in capital markets because of the extreme processing requirements and high velocity data that capital markets need to process. So as we look at AI, at least what I've seen as well as Terry, is many capital markets teams have funded or created emerging technology teams or new product development teams that have been firewalled from the existing run-the-bank organizations, and they were really there to help experiment untainted by the normal day in and day out operations and needs of the business. So what we've seen really successful early deployments in some of these FinTech explorations is in the areas of trade surveillance. We've seen a lot of new, again, the natural language processing, pattern matching, looking at very high velocity, high veracity data to ferret out any nefarious acts that may have occurred, either front office operations or back office operations. We've seen operations streamlining in robotics, a lot of work going on in terms of automating very manual or repetitive tasks. We have concepts in a lot of the payments industry around broken payments, around times to touch, total touch time, time to repair. So we're seeing AI really helping take significant cost lag out of the system, but also adding liquidity, right? That's the biggest thing too, that when we're processing trillions of dollars a day of currencies, we really want to make sure that there's no disruption in any of the flow of those large payments. So streamlining things that are going to be there to make sure efficient payment systems exist. We have some work going on around sentiment analysis, the tens of thousands of research reports that are published each year. That is just, as Terry was mentioning before, the growth of robo-advisors is really there to help automate trading suggestions, or if there's certain asset diversification profiles that clients want to have, can robotics be put to bear on research reports or news feeds that come out that may suggest buying patterns or asset diversification for high net worth clients or any other nationals that want to take the ability to seize a trading opportunity. And then more importantly now than ever, as we've seen has occurred specifically in some of the SWIFT processing networks, the ability to apply AI for counter fraud. So look at out of pattern types of payment transactions, look at things that are occurring within or not within certain boundary conditions, or if there's a manual process that seems to have been subverted somehow. How do we capture that? How do we make sure we capture all the data, whether it's the IP traffic or spoofing that may have occurred? How do we prevent fraud from occurring, given how interconnected all our systems are? And again, our earlier points about the free flow of liquidity, it's important that currency gets moved from counterparty to counterparty, but we need to make sure it's done with a chain of trust. And I think that's where some also the early work around the DLT and blockchain work is helping to solve some of these problems as well, is when you have that extended chain of trust. All right. So, a lot of what we focused on also comes out of the crisis that we all went through 9 or so years ago, is really around the cost containment, as firms needed to shore up their balance sheets and then submit their capital models for stress tests, whether it's CCAR or some of the other tests. That's where a lot of these early AI investments were made. But now we're going to see the pivot occur to really revenue generation, and really, as we look at the quants again, as the quants have really led a lot of the high-performance compute work and the advanced programming models, how are quants using these next-generation technologies to help capture that greater alpha. And there's just been recently, even in just the last couple of weeks, a lot of headlines hitting the press talking about fund managers that are copying their brain to run as an algorithm, right? So people that have left certain shops to start up new shops are trying to squeeze out every potential opportunity in the market. Traditionally, quants, Terry, have been more on the momentum trading side, where they see an arbitrage moment. I think what we're seeing right now is on the AI is, as the headline says there, it's human versus human and it's human versus human versus human and machine. And it's really the goal here is that the robots are not going to be running amok with the shop, that there is knowledge and guidance that we want to help automate in the system to capture opportunity. But really the goal here is that the quants are looking to differentiate, differently than they have in the past. As we have, less volatility in certain markets, how do we train the systems to be more opportunistic? So maybe, Terry, you want to just talk through that?
Yeah, I think that the term is augmented human, and I've needed augmentation for quite some time, so I wish this had come earlier in my life, as being augmented insight to the markets. And again, it's since we're chatting about a company that creates products, frankly, that handles tremendous amounts of data. If we think about what Renaissance is doing for their practice, they're running 11 terabytes of data through their plant a day. It's been reported. Now, last time I added it up, 11 terabytes is a heck of a lot of data.
Absolutely.
It's certainly a heck of a lot more than you would obtain from market data, even if you took the entire option stream throughout the course of the day, as I presume that they surely do. So, getting insight from all of that alternative data, and what we're also hearing about firms are starting to look at experiments in capturing the collective intelligence of that firm. And how would one do that? So I do know that firms are experimenting with taking a look at all of their internal e-communications and chat traffic in distilling the collective intelligence about that group, about what they're discussing, what's trending within the firm, what's the view that's going on within it. We've seen other organizations that are using combinations of good old traditional market data, natural language processing, by taking data out of client CRM engines. So often, as you know, Keith, that the most valuable information that the clients have is the data that they're holding on themselves and holding for their clients, and then being able to mine that, kind of connect it to, correlate it to market activities. I know of one firm that's using natural language processing and an algo that then is taking data out of their CRM, seeing what's going on in the market, and then suggesting investment ideas to sales traders for them to contact their clients about, well, hey, here's an idea, as an example of an augmented human workflow.
Right, and then sometimes when audit or compliance gets involved, Terry, how are these CRM systems used to help traders then justify certain actions that they may have made?
Well, it's excuse me, that's one of the really fascinating parts that I've always found about regulation. Every step of regulation that's come along has required more transparency. Fundamentally is another layer of legislating human beings out of the marketplace. It's far easier to be compliant and auditable through a machine workflow than through a human workflow, where humans may not be as consistently precise in what their actions are.
Right.
And I think that the ultimate or one of the ultimate byproducts from the perspective of a regulator, as these workflows become more machine-based, become more automated, that the challenges around data provenance, the challenges around clear audit trail of what's occurred are being satisfied for the regulator. But then it's creating a challenge for the regulator that the regulator needs then to leverage machine learning type capabilities to just understand all of the reporting and information that the clients are providing to them. So it's
Right.
an interesting loop that's happening that's requiring everyone to leverage or use more advanced compute and insight tools around how they're operating their businesses or oversight.
Right, absolutely. And I think as we go on to the next chart here, that's a lot of also what's going on is the discussion about the rise of AI, the rise of the machines, again, in this human versus human machine versus human and machine. The no present day conversation around machine learning and AI can really avoid the societal concerns of the impact to employment. So, a lot of what we hear in the discussions is that, tasks that don't bring joy are ones that will be the first to be automated, or tasks that are dangerous, or tasks that are extremely repetitive, or those are the ones to be automated. When we look at the operations aspects, right, so we talked on earlier about some of the cost takeout. When we look at KYC or new account opening, many years ago, OCR, ICR type systems were put into place. Now there's more advanced handwriting recognition that is helping us to solve some of the double entry data systems or dual entry data systems that occur because of some of the fragmentation. Firms are creating robots to actually transpose that data from system of capture to system of record. And really, I think what we're seeing is specifically with all the focus around employment globally, higher skilled jobs are going to be more in demand than ever before, right? So definitely things that have been repeatable are going to be replaced with processes, but then the ability to create these new digital experiences, these new automated systems are going to require those digital transformation skills of our millennials coming out, and even people who have been in the workforce for some time. I remember there was a movie done a couple of years ago around the closing of the New York mercantile pit, and when a lot of the open cry traders moved to electronification and the challenges they had there. So some of these activities are going to be very similar to that. It'll be a transition, but it's unfortunately or fortunately where the industry is heading, right? So that's the opportunity that people have to move into some new backgrounds.
Right. I think that's entirely right. And just a couple of quick points here. Jamie Dimon talking about JP Morgan headcount to keep rising. He's certainly not talking about traders. He's talking about data scientists, technologists, which is a bit of a dilemma for those in the industry that don't have the capital or perhaps technological insight to understand how do you go ahead and leverage a data scientist. Having been involved in data and enterprise technology for my entire career, sort of falling out of bed, but a lot of organizations that focus on the markets aren't quite sure how to leverage it. And to your broader point, there's a great law called Conway's Law from Melvin Conway, who was around when black and white pictures were popular, who essentially posited that organizations that create systems or applications are constrained to ensure that those systems or applications operate within their organizational communication structure. In other words, what good old Melvin was saying is that systems are created to work with human workflow throughout largely the history of computerization of workflows. And I think we're beginning to see the inverse occur. I think we're beginning to see that human workflow is being transformed or having to fit into more of an automated application or API-centric, it's called robotic, which I think is a bit of a misnomer, data-centric workflow that is transforming those low-value, repetitive human tasks, which is paying people to do things, but it's certainly not efficient from the basis of an investment in a workforce where the investment in workforce is going to transition to higher order value work, which will be a bit of a challenge as people need to reskill, but ultimately should provide a much richer and frankly more lucrative future for humans as we're transitioning into this new model.
Absolutely, Terry. I 100% agree with you. And I think Tabb Group actually, as we look at trading volume, as we turn this back into specifically around the quants, the amount of trading volume that the quants are driving in the markets has doubled in recent years. I think there was a recent statistic Tabb Group published about 29 to 32% of all equity trades are based or generated by quant firms, right? So we're seeing, and I believe J.P. Morgan Chase actually even said only 10% of trading right now is actually done by human or retail-based brokers. There's just so much of the volume that isn't that automated. Some of it's obviously the high-frequency trading that we've had for years, but now as the quants are, perfecting these models, there's the amount of volume and transaction flow that's coming in from those entities are growing at a very rapid rate.
I think that's right.
Please stand by. We seem to have lost our pickup at the other end.
Happening in any way for us moving forward in the future.
Terry, that's a phenomenal set of insights there. The flow, and actually we'll jump onto the next slide now. This actually talks a little bit about the amount of flow that is going into the quant-based funds has dramatically picked up. But I think there's some discussion in the industry about, even though there's tremendous amount of flow going into quant funds, what's the actual returns that these quant funds are providing, right? Obviously, we've been in a very interesting set of market dynamics where a rising equity and, obviously some strong centralization in a few popular names are driving outsized benchmark type comparisons. But maybe you could talk a little bit here just about going from quant funds that have traditionally been momentum based, now going into more of that augmented type stock picking, and how are those firms trying to differentiate from other quant firms that are out there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We've talked with some firms that are more on the active side, that are looking to create quote unquote active ETFs, and the regulators are having some challenges with that idea because they're not quite sure how they would be managed or how those more active ETF type structures might correlate to the rest of the market as to whether or not they're actually meeting all the regulatory requirements for top of the market, et cetera. So we do know that there are active conversations that are going on with that. We are seeing, and this is in our data, I think we are seeing that there has been quite a trend of the funds beating the indexes that we're seeing, and this is showing, I think, a tightening of that, at least certainly in 2017, and we think that our view might be a little bit more aggressive on the ETF performance versus indexes is one of the very attractive features towards going to the quote-unquote passive strategies.
Absolutely, and kind of like the headline here, similar to our own personal experience with consumer-based AI, it will improve over time, right? So
yep.
Certain funds are getting new models. They're hiring a tremendous amount. In fact, the Wall Street Journal had an extensive set of articles talking about obviously the capture for talent and looking at people who have coming out of certain technology firms going back into finance, where a couple of years ago there was a pendulum of people leaving finance. A lot of the top scientists and PhDs, mathematicians are now coming back into capital markets because they're providing a rich set of tools and technologies for them to work with.
I think most kids today still want to be Mark Zuckerberg instead of Jamie Dimon.
Well said.
It's more comfortable clothes, I suppose, and some other benefits. I think what we're also seeing is parts of the market that perhaps haven't been big technological investors. Recently, there was a story 2-3 weeks ago where T. Rowe is building out a technology center of excellence and is hiring 60 people, including a healthy dose of data scientists. we had the Dimon quote, Jamie Dimon quote earlier. They now have a head of data science at JP. So a chief of data science, which is which is tremendous. I'm really happy that this is my son's going off to university. I'm really happy this is what he's going to be studying. Perhaps I may have had some influence there.
You go.
But I'm really happy that for him that's where it's going, because it's no matter what you're hearing out of this entire presentation, it's about the data.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
It's about getting insight from it, and it's about getting insight from new forms of data and applying it in a manner that's correlative to the balance of what's going on in the market and or the investment priorities of those who are coming into the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And the data has been a key issue for the banks for a number of years. Again, we talked about the stress test and the ability to show the full lineage and provenance of trades, being able to show the source underlying securities when we had these very opaque products before, the ability to show the model and the stress test different factors, and where do kill switches need to be in systems, and provide some of that predictive modeling as well as they not only go aggressively to capture alpha, but then really make sure that they're protecting their balance sheets as well. Again, to quote Jamie Dimon one more time, for a number of years he talked about his fortress balance sheet, and that was a very important piece of institutional corporate policy that he had about protecting the reputation of the firm and making sure that they were very fiscally responsive in what they did. So Terry, as we now talk a little bit, you mentioned workflow a couple of times. Obviously, they are many capital market firms that have had 100-plus year heritage. They deal with all the same problems that large manufacturing firms may deal with, large electronics firms may deal with, where you have this 20, 30, 40 years of siloed systems. You have acquisitions that have occurred quite a bit in capital markets, and we those in industry know of many project code names of consolidation to get to a single source of truth of all acts of commerce. I think that's really where people want to get to. So talk to me about, maybe some of the other newcomers to the space and maybe some of the benefits that they're having, because they don't have a lot of that legacy to work through.
Yeah, so I think, well, thanks, Keith. I think that this is perhaps a little instructive when we talked a little earlier this morning around first mover disadvantage. And we'll talk a little bit about Ant Financial, which is one of our favorite models to take a look at. And as a matter of fact, we're doing a deep dive right now on Ant Financial and what it might mean to capital markets. So, we do see that enterprise workflow is really being fundamentally transformed. And human hypothesis-driven analytics will struggle to keep pace. So you think about the loop of it. Human comes up with a hypothesis, runs an algo to test it, has to consume the results of it, and it's been insightful. It's been in the workflow, but it's having now difficulty keeping pace with the breadth of data. Those algo creators were trained in perhaps a more vertical manner, and the amount of information and multi-asset class trading and breadth of information that one would need to create hypothesis around is just challenging in a word. We're seeing things that are becoming much more than AI, that the client data is its most valuable asset. That training of machine intelligence is, of course, highly dependent on the data. And the more of the data, the better it can be trained. And we're going to see workflows blurring together as data is combined with cognitive computing, and we're already seeing that. And hardware abstraction has progressed to workflow abstraction to support new business models. We have Ant Financial up here, one of my favorite little models, which has come out of Alibaba, sort of the Amazon for Asia Pacific. I think they have, well, certainly hundreds of millions of clients. Alibaba had Alipay, which was their payments arm that was showing cash flows, accounts receivable, accounts payable for all of their clients. And from that data, and I believe they received Ant Financial $4.2 or $4.3 billion funding round last year, which some people could probably retire on. That's a significant amount of money. And from that payments workflow, from Alipay, Ant Financial has now grown, and this data is probably 6 months old, so I might need to update the numbers, to have a payments arm, a wealth management arm, a financing arm, an insurance arm, and a credit reference arm, all data-driven, all cognitive, all correlative to the different data flows, that is bringing a capability set to a community of individuals that perhaps never before would have been able to invest in the markets or take advantage of this type of financial servicing. Now, not sat here this morning suggesting that this model is going to replace the traditional capital markets. I'm not suggesting that in any way. I think what we probably are suggesting is that you take a look at like an Ant Financial or a WeChat, which we mentioned earlier, or Link in Korea. We're seeing perhaps a democratization of some of the workflow for servicing individuals for financial services. And as I say, I'm not suggesting it's going to replace traditional capital markets, but I think we surely are suggesting that traditional capital markets should be, if they're not already, working to understand how they might be able to support these models to either be a place to find new customers as they become more sophisticated, or to understand where there's capital flows that are happening that perhaps are not plugged into them, that are coming into alternative channels as represented like an Ant Financial. It's a tremendous story. It's a cognitive AI data story, and I think that we're going to see this type of story growing around the world.
Excellent, Terry. Yeah, so you see these transformational companies emerging. You're seeing a lot of the traditional capital markets players are also looking to get into the online lending space and partnerships with like On Deck Capital and others. Really trying to open up and differentiate their portfolio to prevent too much base erosion to these new incumbents. It's a really, really exciting space for us all to be in. So Terry, as we wrap to the last section here, is really talking about the people that have been with us on this webinar for the last 40 minutes or so. What are the lessons learned that these high-performance compute quant funds that with extremely talented data scientists and PhDs, as they are going through and trying to understand how they can go and stay current, we really want to talk in a couple different areas that they can start to institutionalize on their journey today. So we coined this presentation around smarter infrastructure, and that's really something that Solace, as a world-class leader in financial services, capital markets, high-speed data movement, and reliable enterprise messaging technologies. We've worked with clients for a number of years on them for them to achieve these outsized gains in markets by looking at a differentiated portfolio. We're seeing our traditional customers, I'm sure you've seen this as well, Terry, look at modernizing their IT portfolio across these four major areas. So we talked a lot about data and about what the work that their firms are doing to refactor their existing systems, whether it's for compliance to RegTech, which I know colleagues of ours presented a week or two ago in London at a RegTech conference that was very well attended and a very interactive session there, or which I've seen, we've seen, I should say, in a lot of our clients, a consolidation of trading and risk systems, again, as I mentioned before, but back down to that single source of truth for all acts of commerce, right? So how do you do pre-trade analysis and post-trade analysis? How do you reduce the amount of hops that you need to do for trade completion when you do trade data augmentation and enrichment? Firms are investing a significant amount of resources in coming up with that single global view of a customer and that single global view of a trade. We've even seen some discussions in the DLT community that's one of the benefits that a distributed ledger can do from a regulator standpoint is that if all trades are being settled in a common place, then the regulators will have a clear view to that as well without the T+2, T+1 challenges that we've all faced. Obviously, no conversation in capital markets today can occur without talking about cloud or hybrid cloud. And really, we've seen most of our clients adopt a hybrid cloud, right? Unless they were an Ant Financial or someone who's doesn't have an existing book of records, long-term positions that need to be settled into some of their existing systems. Hybrid cloud is really the dominant topology that we're seeing our clients adopt. And this is really an exciting part for Solace to really work hand in glove with our clients as they step into this new frontier and really look to get not only the financial costs savings that going to a cloud-optimized infrastructure can do, but really some of the newer technology around GPUs and FPGAs that the cloud providers are starting to provide. We've seen a very rich set of machine learning libraries and advanced AI capability being highlighted at all of the Google conferences and at the Amazon summits and reInvent conferences. And that's really what's making a lot of our clients excited, is that they can maybe not deploy onto these machine learning public clouds, but they can do some back testing and trial runs to see how certain scenarios would play out without having to roll in bespoke hardware into their own on-premise data center. So, we've seen a lot of excitement in that spot. And then really, as we look at the applications and what we need to do, clients need to do to adopt these new technologies, it's really seeing a strong excitement in this industry around microservices, really, and as people are looking at cloud-native based development styles, augmenting their teams with the new 12-factor app design models, right? And how do you fast fail? How do you fail fast? How do you adopt more of the Netflix style of architecture? Rapid delivery, rapid deploy. Really seeing a lot of great excitement in that spot. Now, not every microservice experience will be perfect, right? And I think that's what we're finding, through our years in technology as we go through, uppercase, lowercase systems were going to help solve all the systems analyst programming, and then object-oriented was going to solve everything. So we've seen certain hype cycles throughout the industry, but the one thing we've really seen with microservices is really consumer-based success with some of the early pioneers using these architectures is now making it easier for capital markets teams to replicate that success that the other people have had. And really at the heart of what we do here at Solace is around the open data movement. So we like to talk about a digital river as data is kept in existing systems of record. How do you bridge that into analytic systems? How do you bring that or expose that data into these machine learning models? Having the ability to have seamless data movement go from your existing systems out to these newer cognitive-based systems is very exciting for us.
And if I would just add one thing to that, agree with all of that. And I think that it's workflows that a company like Solace has seen about high volume, high velocity data traffic. What we've talked about throughout the course of our conversation this morning is so much more data coming into the workflow. As things are automated, it's generating more metadata, it's generating more information that needs to be understood, so that what we're seeing the world evolving to is really, even for somewhat pedestrian workflows, once they get to scale, we're talking about high volume, high velocity enterprise infrastructure that's going to be required for these type of services to actually work. And maybe it's because I've been an enterprise guy for most of my life.
Right.
I love this part of the plumbing of how things work, but without quality enterprise-grade infrastructure, all of these workflows simply will not be able to be realized.
Absolutely agree with that. Right. So we definitely see people that are starting to explore and do a minimal viable product on technology that's available. But as you're looking to scale and have that repeatable, auditable, traceable type of systems deployment, having enterprise scale middleware and other technologies is critical for us. So as we start to pull apart a little bit of what we spoke about already, the hybrid cloud. So I think probably the last tagline here is the important one for us, is making sure that these applications you're writing are going to be able to move to the different cloud providers as the different cloud providers enhance their value proposition. So people want to make sure they avoid vendor lock-in when they look at hybrid cloud. People want to experiment with the emerging machine learning and cognitive libraries that are out there. We're going to see different cloud providers advance at different scales and pace, so the ability to experiment in one cloud environment and then move those learnings to another cloud environment with different machine learning libraries is going to be flexible or is going to be critical, because you want to have that flexibility in your system that you're not rewriting things from scratch. So having a set of middleware and application technology that helps preserve that investment is going to be critical. And then also when you go and actually deploy these systems, the regulators are going to want to make sure that you can prove to them that the data was not diverted or where the data is stored, having, again, as Terry's brought up before, the full transparency and that regulated aspect is going to be very critical here. As we go into microservices, as we touched on already, really the API economy is one that is huge impact right now on capital markets as well. So we're seeing consumer-based API type technology coming into a corporate app store where people, especially in the Swift corporate payment space, are looking to do extended analytics around counterparty agreements. If you're looking at track and trace through some of these large systems, there's a lot of analytics that firms are providing to help augment that traditional payment flow. And as I mentioned before, you're also taking systems that may have been written in specific domain-specific languages or very proprietary time series databases as you start to refactor them into that single source of truth of all acts of commerce. Going with a microservice-based topology and application framework is going to help you preserve that for future enhancements that we see into the space. And then again, I'm on the open data movement, and key to what we spoke about at the beginning is all these different types of data sources that are coming in, structured, unstructured. We're having voice and image also be important, specifically in some of the trade surveillance activities. I mentioned earlier about the trade sentiment, so that's the ability to digest, understand, annotate research reports, looking for buy signals, sell signals. What was the sentiment of the analyst? How do you correlate that with other events or other data sources that are occurring in the industry? And then really having the ability to support this through open standard interfaces, right? So if you build a new data silo based upon a certain proprietary XML format, it's going to be harder to get to it from your trade surveillance or other types of systems. So really supporting open standards is going to be key for us as we have technology that evolves at, 6-month, 8-month, 9-month cycles, right? I think that's the other piece that we're seeing is that these machine learning libraries are coming out fast and furious, so the ability to support open standards and not have data locked away that is in a proprietary nature is going to be key for us. And then we look at, specific fit-for-purpose type technology. So everyone who has paid attention to the accelerator technology space, you see GPUs specifically from NVIDIA be very popular both in the gaming, we see car autonomics, and then obviously in some of the value at risk-based models, they are very well optimized for the extreme pipelining that a GPU can provide. Here at Solace, we've had our technology, hardware appliances technology built on FPGA blades that are specifically accelerated for encryption and for guaranteed data delivery. And we've had great success, and clients have been able to use that technology in a very reliable fashion. As we start to see cybersecurity requirements grow, the strength of encryption libraries with hardware assist on that is going to be key because everything is going to have to be encrypted no matter what, and it's a very expensive set of operations, so having those fit-for-purpose type capabilities there is going to be important. And then we're seeing, through Apple Pay and others, the introduction into more of a common vernacular around tokenization and obviously data obfuscation. So when we look at specific in-country data rules and regulations, the data has to stay resident, but what role can data obfuscation do to make sure that systems that are built abide by those sovereign nation-based practices? So we're seeing some nice advancements there, and we're seeing message volumes grow, right? So having a reliable messaging fabric to handle all these new consumers that are looking for very deep, dense calculations. How can you make sure that you're providing that reliable capability to your application partners? That's also going to be very critical.
Right. One of the key things you mentioned around the hardware support, assist around the hardware security modules, so that firms would then be able to operate with surety, knowing that their key would be their encryption keys would be protected and not available in hardware where it wouldn't be able to be hacked, is one of the I think more important InfoSec security capability sets that everyone should be looking toward.
Absolutely. And we're just going to wrap in a couple of minutes, so we do have some questions coming in. So Terry, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll throw the first question to you. So we have a question: what's the risks of more FinTech moving to public clouds?
Well, I think negligible, frankly, at this point. It was a significant concern, and we've done a significant amount of work into this space. I think when you're looking at the opportunity set of a completely software-driven infrastructure that has the encryption capabilities that we just mentioned a moment ago, one's ability to have greater insight and transparency on your operation, for it to be extensible, to be able to create architectural constructs that gives you far more, not only elasticity, extensibility, but far more capability sets for recovery and resilience, all in an environment that is highly secure from physical perspective, from encryption perspective. I think there's an enterprise set of capabilities that are available today that I would have loved to have had when I was working in a bank a number of years ago. So I think it's a different mindset. It's a different way that you would need to operate. And we're seeing firms across the board actively embracing that type of move. I think a rather conservative firm and reasonably so, DTCC, is now actively moving part of their production environment into the public cloud after doing a significant amount of discovery. And I think that there's really no inhibitors that should be considered. You need to educate your risk and compliance teams. You need to understand how the architecture operates. You need to understand how it works with your operational harness. But with sufficient effort, you should be able to do so in a rather sure way. And I think one of the keys here is understand how the balance of your on-prem infrastructure operates, and what partners, what capabilities would you be able to leverage that's on-prem that would give you an extensibility into the cloud as well. So there's a couple of different things to look at, but where the level of maturity where these things are today, I certainly don't see any inhibitors.
Excellent. And as we talk to this, one of our closing slides here around open data movement, that's really one of the firm beliefs that Solace has is, public clouds are now becoming more safe for capital markets firms to use. We're seeing more and more public acknowledgement in the press of firms moving into that, and really our goal is to provide that investment protection for firms as they start to rewrite and embrace public clouds, whether it's for IoT use cases, capital markets use cases, enterprise messaging use cases. We really are in a fortunate position to collaborate and help clients realize their best capabilities here. Any other questions? Dave, I'll turn it over to you just for on a moderator standpoint. Any other questions that have come in?
I don't see anything else. However, let me first start by thanking both you, Terry, and you, Keith, for this great amount of insight. I certainly learned a tremendous more about the financial industry than I knew before going in on this. However, for our audience, there's still a chance to enter your questions. If we can't get to them during the webinar itself, we will try to get answers back out to the attendees post this webinar. There are attachments available in your attachment tabs, which go into more details around the financial industry, as well as looks into microservices, cloud, and other places where you may find data in use here. And please, if you will take a moment to rate this webinar in the Rate This tab below your screen, that would be great. Again, Terry, thanks for joining us today, and Keith, thanks for your amount of insights and working to make sure that we get the right answers as we move forward into this new and exciting world where FinTech seems to be heading.
Great, Dave. Thank you so much, Terry. Really appreciate the conversation we had. Hopefully, people on the phone got as much out of it as I did. I definitely walked away with a greater appreciation.
Well, that's very kind, and it was a pleasure to come and sit and have a chat with you and our audience this morning. And hope everyone has a good day.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.